All right, well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the National Industrial Transportation League webinar. I'm Jennifer Hedrick, and I have the pleasure of being the Executive Director of NITL, and we want to thank you all for joining us today. We have a lot of members on. It's great to see so many names and connect with you in this way, and hopefully soon we can all connect in person. I know many of you received our invitation from colleagues or through social media and may not be familiar with our organization. And I want to give you a little bit of detail on NITL. We were founded back in 1907, and we have a mission to serve as the voice of the shipper in Washington, D.C., meaning that we strive to keep our members and colleagues informed and engaged on issues of importance to shippers, focusing intently on regulatory and legislative activity in Washington, D.C. And our long history in Washington has given us a seat at the table and opportunity to influence change on issues that matter to freight shippers, both on the Hill and with federal agencies. And we're unique in that we cover issues across rail, ocean, and surface transportation supply chains. So our session today fits snugly into our mission and focus and really exemplifies who we are as an organization, our desire and goal to bring timely and relevant content, knowledge, research, and data points from those in the know and from decision makers and those with boots on the ground on issues that affect shippers and the broader supply chain. So I'm really excited about today's session. We've got a topic in front of us that's breaking news, a panel of experts from companies directly involved in ensuring that the COVID-19 vaccine is moved efficiently and expeditiously, and at a time when COVID-19 cases are on the rise, as we're all seeing play out from various vantage points, professionally, personally, and geographically. And our webinar today is part of an ongoing NITL webinar series that we've started this fall and will continue into 2021. And I want to thank our sponsors that have supported us throughout our series and give a special thanks to the sponsors of today's session: Strategic Wave Technology, Hirschbach Motor Lines, Pride Transport, and TTX. So thank you all. And before we jump into the session, I want to share the format that we're holding today's session under. We are recording this session, and during this time you will remain muted. And we welcome and encourage questions and comments throughout. You can submit those through the chat or the Q&A function, and we'll conclude our session today by taking questions directly from you. So please ask away. Our session will be moderated by Jeff Tucker, who is the CEO of Tucker Company Worldwide and chair of the NITL Highway Transportation Committee. Jeff, I want to thank you for organizing this fantastic group of panelists, and I'll turn it over to you to share a bit more about yourself and get things underway. So thanks, Jeff.
Thank you, Jennifer. Good morning or good afternoon to those of us in Europe or elsewhere. I am Jeff Tucker. Our company is the oldest privately held freight brokerage in the United States, and we specialize in project cargo, overdimensional freight, but also food and life science and healthcare. So I'm particularly excited about our session today, and you know, it's interesting that it comes at a time where the U.S. and even parts of the world are increasingly politically polarized, yet simultaneously we are working together as a world in ways unimaginable before this year to come up with a common goal, and that is to develop effective vaccines and effective therapeutics to combat this COVID-19 virus, so we can get back to work, back to going to restaurants, bars, concerts, and maybe get some of our lives back. The news of Pfizer and Moderna, their breakthroughs this week and recent couple weeks are everywhere, and rightly so. And as someone who specializes in life science and healthcare, I'm keenly aware of how specialized and technical of an art form it is to move pharmaceuticals. It's nothing like moving food or other temperature-controlled goods. It's nothing like moving just about anything else, really, to be quite honest. And of all the things we could possibly need to get to every square inch of this planet, why did it have to be vaccines? Today, we've got 4 experts from different areas of the supply chain who are going to help us examine the world's largest logistics project in history, and what that's going to entail. So let's get right to them. We have Mary Tussing, head of the Americas Special Products for United Airlines Cargo. And Mary, if you just say a few words about yourself.
Sure. Thank you very much, Jennifer, and pleased to be a part of this opportunity. My name is Mary Tussing, and I've worked for United Airlines on the cargo side of the business for about 25 years, all specializing in air pharma logistics. At United, I'm really excited to share that as an airline, and not just as a division, they've been working cross-functionally with the COVID-19 task force to prepare for the day distribution becomes a reality. And this means not just, like I said, from the cargo side of the business, but includes everything from Boeing, FAA, pilots, engineering, network scheduling, everything that it needs to take a look at our fleet as it stands today, even though we have reduced passenger flying with accelerated cargo demand and how we balance that within our industry. So thanks very much. Really excited about today's opportunity to talk.
Thanks, Mary. Next, I'd like to ask Larry St. Onge, President, Life Sciences and Healthcare for DHL, to introduce himself.
Sure, and thank you, Jeff, and thank you, NITL, for inviting me today. So my responsibility, I am Larry St. Onge. I've been with the company more than 3 decades, so I'm an old man, I guess, at this point, in my responsibilities, but I lead the Life Sciences and Healthcare business for the company globally. Life Sciences and Healthcare is a multi-billion euro business for DHL, and really our focus in solutions are a combination of 2 decades of investment and development in our global network to be able to support this. And certainly looking forward to this discussion around the vaccine challenges as we move through the course of the event today.
Thank you, Larry. Next, Laurent Kovacs, Regional Head of Vertical Market Healthcare for DB Schenker Americas. Laurent.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Jennifer, for having me. I have spent over 15 years focusing on the healthcare industry and supporting the supply chains of the healthcare industry. I am from Hungary, worked in various European countries, and reside here in Atlanta for the past 9 years. At DB Schenker, I lead the regional vertical market healthcare, where our mission is to provide logistics execution with patient safety and well-being at the center, while ensuring product integrity using enhanced end-to-end visibility and standardized processes in a worldwide network. I'm very excited to be here today and share my views and vantage point on this tremendous exercise and undertaking.
Thank you, everyone. So we're going to get right to it. I mentioned in my opening remarks that moving pharmaceuticals and even vaccines within the pharmaceutical category are not like virtually anything else. Michael, I'm going to ask you to maybe set the table for us, if you would. Could you explain just for a moment what GDP is? It's not gross domestic product, GDP, but why it's important, and
Sure.
perhaps why pharma shipping is so fundamentally different from general temp control shipping.
Sure. The way I see GDP is just an extension of GMP, which is a manufacturing process for the pharmaceuticals and medicines. GDP is a set of guidelines and regulations pertaining to the warehousing, the storage, and the logistics of the pharmaceuticals based on the label or the temperature label that we'll see on the package, and how that package is managed and handled throughout the supply chain. It's honestly, GDP is just more of a common sense practice of how to manage that package, but you often find that it's not a common practice, especially globally. Many places have their own ideas of GDP or abbreviated versions of GDP, whereas here in the US, our FDA is our oversight and government agency that helps us manage the GDP. But as for the differentiations, you have to look at what is GDP pertaining to, and GDP is pertaining to products, medicines, and life-saving items that are going to save the lives of mothers, grandmothers, daughters, sons, and such. So the expectation for us to get this right is at an all-time high. So a major differentiation between this and other temperature-controlled products that may go through various supply chains. And as far as for us as a thermal packaging company, us being a GDP certified organization and currently working with some of the largest global players in the manufacturing of vaccines and distribution, we're looking to play a key and integral part within, the global distribution of these vaccines to really help eradicate and eliminate COVID as we see it here as a global pandemic.
And what are some of the, from a packaging point of view, what are some of the biggest complications you see arising within the supply chain for a moment?
So I'll step out of a sky cell idea here and move over to more of the frozen, smaller packaged goods containing the dry ice. One thing that we're seeing quickly, and I just saw this on the television today, was Pfizer stating that they are going to now manufacture dry ice in their own facilities, both in Michigan and California. And this leads me to believe the amount of dry ice that's going to be used and utilized in these packages and the complications with IATA and the airlines and managing this amount of dry ice in their aircraft. Let's think about this. These packages are exuding CO2 at a rapid basis, containing a steel fuselage with people breathing these things. We have to really manage the amount of distribution and the time frame in which these products can get the 10-day delivery to destination. That must be by air freight when we're going cross country.
Thanks, Michael. Mary, would you maybe just comment on that dry ice comment that Michael just mentioned?
Sure, and that's a really valid point, that the increase necessary to carry vaccines in any tangible quality means that internally we have to work with our engineering and our mechanics, but also work with the FAA, work with Boeing to make sure that the aircraft limitations can be raised safely. The luxury that we have at this point in time, luxury or unfortunate luxury, as you might put it, is we do have a decreased passenger demand. So we do still have airplanes that are on the ground not flying right now. So we can take a fleet of airplanes, look increase dry ice allowances with agreement from all parties, and then fly them separately from perhaps an airplane that does have passengers going on it from point A to point B. So, we wouldn't have had that go because all of our planes were fully utilized, whereas today we have fleets that we can look to increase dry ice without having to worry about the people upstairs and what impact it might have on them. But it's a very important consideration because more than just a consolidator airline is going to become necessary. It's going to flow to every piece of equipment that's up in the air to help execute what's coming down the road.
Thank you. So I'm going to, I appreciate setting the table with regard to GDP and the packaging and some of those. But, at a high level, I'll ask maybe Larry first. At a high level, what is it about, delivering this vaccine to the world that makes it the large logistics challenge that it is?
Well, thank you, Jeff. And it really is truly the largest healthcare logistics problem the world's ever seen. It starts with scale. Before COVID broke out, the world would consume 3 to 4 billion doses of vaccine on an annual basis. That's a combination of flu and smallpox and meningitis and all the other, various categories that we're inoculated for, Shingrix and others out there. So certainly scale. In order to be able to inoculate the world or raise the world population to some level of herd immunity, we're going to have to consume on a global basis somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 billion plus doses of vaccine. So it immediately starts with that problem. You're talking 2.5 times what the world normally sees, and the world's not stopped shipping meningitis and flu vaccine and others. So that's part of the problem right there, just the sheer scale of it, particularly in the context of, as Mary articulated, a very reduced air freight capacity in the sky today as we look at it. That's the first problem. The second problem, in my perspective, revolves around the mix of temperature requirements. Typically, a clinical trial will run 3 to 5 years to develop a vaccine, perhaps even longer in many cases. We're talking, a development of a vaccine in a period of months, less than a year. And, most of these scenarios that we're reading about in the press on a daily basis. Well, what many people don't realize, although I'm absolutely confident that the medical pharmaceutical manufacturer is doing everything they have to ensure that the product is safe and for us to consume. they're not able to gather the typical temperature stability data that goes along with that clinical trial process. That's usually built over a period of years, and vaccines are typically managed in a 5C environment. So now we're talking about some of the biotechnology platforms out there, the mRNA sequence specifically, where Pfizer, Moderna, CureVac, and others play, which has a concern because this is a brand new technology platform that's never been used to develop a vaccine. It's been used in the past for oncology treatments, but those treatments were managed at a -70 to a -80 C temperature range. So then when we look at a solution, and certainly we're all keen to see Pfizer, Moderna arrive with a solution as we move forward, but that ability to be able to maintain that temperature stability and to manage that, creates that concern about the dry ice usage. So it's a bit of a shifting sandstorm because although Moderna and Pfizer are leading, at the same time, we know that Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca and even the Russian Sputnik project and the Chinese are developing, and we're seeing all those vaccines start to develop and potentially arrive here over the course of the next several months. So what that mix is going to look like, how much dry ice we're going to need to be able to support this, and then the final piece to me, when I go to sleep at night, I'm not so worried about getting the product to the market, but how do we effectively distribute it in the countries where we're shipping it to? And, I think that'll be another key challenge for the world as we move forward. So I said overall, a combination of all those impacts that bring this into the context of absolutely one of the biggest challenges the world's ever faced from a logistics perspective.
That's a mouthful for sure. I heard an interview on NPR where there was an Indian physician, epidemiologist who indicated that their university had 2 relatively small freezers capable of handling that temperature range of that 90 degrees below. And he wasn't aware of any others in the country. So it gives you some indication of what that challenge will be. Maybe Mary, would you like to add anything to that from your perspective? What makes this such a large challenge?
Sure. So, above the dry ice is, and Larry summed it up nicely, is, there's many companies that are seemingly close to getting across the finish line and moving from a clinical to an actual state of production and distribution. And, if they come rapidly behind each other, there's going to be a very quick bottleneck when it comes to packaging, air capacity, recovery at destination. And then there's still, not every company is equal when it comes to, is it 1 vaccine or is it 2 doses? Is it -70? Is it -20? Is it 5? There's some disparity in that. So not everybody is about dry ice, and phase 1 of vaccine releases could vary greatly from phase 2, where you have more stability data, as Larry referred to, and then maybe they can refine their requirements for transport. So there's still a lot of unknown, even though what's known is becoming more visible every single day, almost every single hour, it seems, depending on where you get your information. So more than ever, all of us, not just as an airline, but all of us on all sides of this have to be more agile and more quick to adapt and respond in the name of going out to dinner and going to a movie or going on vacation again. So it's really just, time is literally of the essence.
Laurent, we haven't heard from you yet, and just want to see if you wanted to weigh in on this subject as well.
Sure, thanks, Jeff. I think I wanted to add a different shading to the points that Larry mentioned, rightly so. And the interesting part of this undertaking is, as also Larry mentioned, with other vaccines that we have to keep continuing distributing. I think one of the most predominant, the flu vaccine in the US, I think we consume somewhere around 200 million doses every season. So that's not going to stop. And on top of that, this issue has a compounding other effect, because other supply chains that we keep on moving will also have to keep on moving. So if I think of the high-tech industry, automotive industry, the perishable industry, food that needs to continue to be moved. And if I look at the retraction of capacity that happened throughout 2020, and which is not likely to return to levels, I think we are going to be facing an even greater challenge unless we would be able to pause all of our activities in the favor of the COVID-19 vaccine distribution, which I highly doubt. Now, in addition, another interesting vantage point here is that we are talking about this undertaking with the assumption that everything will go according to the plan, whereas if something breaks down in the transportation chain, may there be a delay, or may there be a challenge with the distribution after, let's say, the aircraft landed somewhere here in the US or somewhere in Europe or anywhere else, and another airport in the world, what are we going to do with storing the vaccine, which has such a polarity in temperature requirements? Some vaccines require -20, some others even -70 below. And the facilities and the infrastructure is really scarce in this regards. So what I know the community has been doing is to beef up our capabilities in terms of intermediate storage in low temperatures, sub-zero temperatures. Now, that's also not only a challenge for the infrastructure, I think it's also a challenge for the processes. We touched on GDP, good distribution practices, which is a fundamental process-driven map for us to operate. So medicine can get to the patients with retaining its integrity. And so when you introduce high amounts of dry ice into this process, we need to think about of the human vantage point. People who handle this in our warehouses, they are our frontline workers. They need to take a different stance on how they might handle products. So I think there is a lot to focus on. And I think what I like in our community and industry that we recognize that, and we've been working very keenly on preparing our frontline people as well.
Good, thank you, Laurent. Laurent, we were talking previously a little before as we were preparing here about air freight and you know how air travel is down, and Mary mentioned, you know, it's going to take a lot of the air freight capacity to you know, to pitch in. But what potential impact to air freight will this vaccine have, and you know, in relationship also to today's capacity trends and in 2021 going forward?
Right. So if I look back what happened in April of this year, within a matter of weeks, the capacity that we had was ejected from the network, especially because a lot of our cargo, realize it or not, moves in belly, and Mary can speak to that for sure, to a high degree, probably 60%. Now, with the passenger traffic disappearing and really not returning to levels that we needed and we were used to, the industry went over to securing capacity from freighters. Now, freighters were an essential part always and have been moving supply chains. What is different here now is that if I look at statistics this year, the demand on freighter capacity has increased by 30–35% and continues to increase because the lack of the belly capacity. Now, there are a couple of challenges about this that I'd like to highlight, and they are quite interesting. When you start increasing your network demand on a freighter network, what that really means is that you're flying more with an aircraft. Now, flying more with an aircraft actually may result in more technical challenges, AOGs, aircraft on ground, technical issues that might arise, and that will have a ripple effect in further availability and also in scheduling. So we have seen some delays and some increasing delays because of that, and that results in supply chain delays. So when we have already a very fine-tuned planned supply chain and there are delays, then that causes disruption. And then to add to that, I think on the air freight side and the capacity side, what we might not think of as a direct impact is the handling agents. So capacity is one thing. We need to have people also at the airport supporting to put together, build the pallets, get them to the aircrafts. And as we have seen earlier this year, and that continues still to happen, we dealing with a potential COVID-19 outbreak at one or the other airport, at the ground handlers facilities, which further gives us challenges in getting those freights built up and ready to fly. And that's just unfortunately reality we have to live with and consider. So that adds to potential delays.
Thanks, Laurent. Mary, from United's perspective, what potential impact does this have to general air freight?
It has a huge, because beside the vaccine, there is everything that goes into this, from the packaging of the vaccine that has to continue to flow, whether it's a syringe, a vial, the labeling, whatever it is that has to continue. And though it may not be perceived as important as the medicine itself, it certainly is equally as important, which those supplies, whether they go by another mode of transport or they are coming in from international origins on air, become part of the big challenge in all of this. The other challenge is the military is part of the distribution here in the United States. There's been a lot of discussion about using the large integrators, which are currently flying with full loads of everyday things that we're buying and we're seeing across the globe. So the question is, how do we balance their role in the distribution with what they're doing today, and that impact to air as well. I mean, this is really multidimensional, and it doesn't really just go around the medicine itself. It goes into everything else that has demand for air transport. And, you know, a nod to Laurent for acknowledging, you know, everybody here has on the ground crews that are vulnerable to getting the virus in their working environment. And how do we control that? Because even the best measures don't prevent your crews in the warehouse, whether it be from a freight forwarder or a trucking or an airline side, of getting sick, not to mention people inside air control towers, people plane side that load the cargo to and off the airplanes. I mean, there's a lot of facets about this that go far beyond just the medicine being ready to ship that we have to juggle, and the amount of people in each organization. So it's not just United, and it's not just DHL or DB Schenker. It's really all of us with the different pieces that we have to juggle through this. So it's a much bigger equation than just the distribution of the vaccine.
I'm going to switch gears just a second. We have a couple related questions around how much involvement will the military play in distribution, and who will play the leader in world distribution. And you know, my understanding is my best understanding, and maybe I'll ask Larry to correct me, is that the government is the customer for most of these cases. Would that be correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, so I know that there's been a lot of talk about the military's role, but I think that most of us understand that it's commercial entities that are going to be executing on the transportation. Would you also, versus the military actually moving the freight?
Well, sure. If you look at Project Warp Speed as an example here in the U.S., Jeff, what's been developed by the government is a plan to partner with McKesson, you know, one of the largest pharmaceutical distributors in the U.S., and work through them. And McKesson would then potentially subcontract further down the stream as they look at the flows throughout the U.S. I believe with the military to supervise over that entire supply chain. So in that regard, I think while I'm ex-military and I have the greatest respect for the logistics capability of the military, at the same time, as Laurent and Mary, aptly pointed out, this is highly specialized movements, and it really does take not only a good, but a terrific understanding of good distribution practice, how to analyze lane movements, how to plan for the risks, I mean, part of the challenge is if a product is sitting on the tarmac, what's your relationship with the airline partner to be able to reach into that operation and get it off the tarmac if it's been exposed too long. If you have concerns and the temperature tells are starting to give you messaging that the product's sitting too exposed or naked, or it's not in the right refrigerated temperature. I mean, there's all those aspects. This certainly isn't something that anybody could jump into without having a long level of intellectual sweat equity, I guess is probably a good way to describe it, and the systems to be able to support that. And I think that's where the partnership aspect of it comes into to play. I will say I'm as leading our healthcare business in DHL. I'm very active in a number of different action groups, and I've seen a number of collaborative efforts going on around the world. So I'm certainly encouraged at the level of conversation and interplay. I think all of the major logistics providers and the airlines are all still a little bit in this process of assessing gaps and what we need to do to try to close those gaps in terms of our capabilities. But then it will take the overlay of all that to build the right puzzle pieces to put it together to be able to fully effectively solve the problem of delivering the vaccine to the world. So it's still work in progress, and I think a lot of work yet to be done, but I'm still heartened to see where we're going with this collectively as a logistics business, but also from a worldwide perspective.
Continuing with audience question here, and in the same similar vein, let's say, what do you think governments need to get right in order to not miss and to be successful? I know that, for example, certain countries, maybe I know there's a country in South America I won't name, where I know a lot of pharmaceutical customers have trouble with customs clearance, right? And in some cases, the product goes bad. Is that the number one issue the governments need to be thinking about in terms of being successful? Are there others? What Michael, maybe you want to start us off?
Well, for us, our engagement with customs and such is making sure that we can offer protection while delays are taking place. I spoke on a conference yesterday, and a key term that came up was freight at rest is freight at risk, and that's where really the engagement and the analyzing of the needs of the customers and the product and the cost versus risk really comes into play with the packaging and how we can assess and help out the successful delivery of the products. But the guys here in the forwarding community, these are the guys working with the boots on the ground, with the brokerage teams and with the customs guys. I kind of turn over to them because they've got a lot more working connections with these guys and really understanding how that process can flow and what it may look like here in the future.
Would anyone else like to comment on that?
Jeff.
Well, go ahead, Laura.
Thanks, Larry. I think for the freight forwarding community in this process, I do hope that governments around the world will recognize that there is a different path of action that needs to be taken in order to, as you say, avoid lengthy delays in the customs process. And just like here for us with the FDA, if there is such thing as emergency authorization, then I think we should be also encouraging or key stakeholders to think about maybe a speed up process when it comes to customs, because indeed the longer these vaccines stay on the ground, the larger the risk becomes. And as I alluded to earlier, with the lack of specific storage capabilities overall, it could become extremely challenging.
I think I would add to that just a little bit with Laurent's comments. I couldn't agree more. I think, can the governments consider some form of classification where the vaccine becomes essentially equivalent to diplomatic material? And to be able to clear this, because that material moves through very, very seamlessly in most parts of the world. It's just an approach, just a theoretical approach. But I think some of the industry action groups I've been involved in, that discussion is going on. The other piece that I would continue to on is also the final mile on this. If I look at the world from my perspective, especially the Southern Hemisphere, Jeff, you made the comment about South America or, Latin America. If you think about the context of the Middle East and Africa, parts of Asia, where the temperature extremes can be severe or significant in that context, I think the final mile infrastructure is going to be challenged. And I think in that regard, governments need to be thinking about that now. How are we going, if in fact the commercial model is going to be the manufacturer will deliver the product to country, and then the country's going to own the final mile solution, then they need to be having a collaborative public-private engagement where they're leveraging the subject matter expertise that Laurent's company and my company and the other major LSPs that play in this space have in this area. That was, to me, a significant gap that was initially exposed when the pandemic broke out, and the challenges around PPE surfaced. I mean, certainly there are other challenges around, the primary origin being too consolidated and too leveraged in one spot and overcoming physical infrastructure. But I think if they're planning and they're working on those collaborative arrangements and at least creating that dialogue in the country and really thinking it through, it'll certainly lead to a more successful outcome than what it will without that kind of engagement. So personally, I'm of the opinion you cannot overplan this enough. You have to be thinking about all the details. Where's the dry ice replenishment going to be? If the product available, if the product's sitting on the ground, what's the process to be able to do that? Who owns that responsibility? Is it the airline? Is it the LSP? Is it the government agent? Whatever it might be. But those are that's where the devil in the details will make the difference between successful outcomes and unsuccessful outcomes.
Thank you. There's another audience question I'll ask. I'll try to address just briefly, and then I'll kick it to you folks, because any assessment on how the trucking industry in North America is preparing for the potential to have a lean driver base for non-vaccine shipping get leaner as some drivers get involved in transporting vaccines? Are there plans in motion to stimulate more driver capacity as vaccines move closer to reality? And just to I guess to emphasize or punctuate that, if you look at the Morgan Stanley Freight Index, that's it's been my gold standard for a decade in terms of where is demand. You see reefer demand at an all-time high right now, all-time high over the last 14, 15 years. And that's before one load of this it begins to move. So I see this as it's certainly a challenge, but I also know that within the temperature control community, there's only a small portion of those temperature control carriers that you would trust for GDP purposes. So I do think that it depends how long, my perception is it depends how long this takes. If this is all done within a short couple or 3 months, it's going to be a far more major impact. If it's spread out over 6 or 8, it'll still be an impact, but maybe a little less. But and I think what we saw early in COVID in the shutdowns is that the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration allowed additional hours and relaxed a little bit of their the regulation with regard to people who were moving PPE and such. That's my take on it, but I'll ask if anyone else has thoughts on that, not just maybe in North America, but elsewhere.
Well, Jeff, I'll give a quick comment. So contextually, I think we have to remember that there's some very sophisticated temperature control packaging that's already been developed to support this. And certainly Michael's company is one of those key providers, but there are others out there that have the capability. And I think we have a tendency at the moment to get very fixated on the whole aspect of the -70 arrival or a vaccine that's going to require the -70. But in fact, I think it's going to be a combination of multiple temperature regimes as we move forward. But I do believe that at the end of the day, it's the packaging that will save the day. If there's not enough refrigerated trailer capacity to be available, I do think at the end of the day, you could put packages or pallet-sized parcel packages inside a trailer and move them in a conventional straight trailer without having to necessarily worry about it. as long as the dry ice is fully replenished and it's available, we're still able to move, border to border in the U.S. in 5 days or less. So, you put trailer, team driver programs in place, and you can speed that up a bit. So I think in that regard, capacity concerns me a bit on the road, but I don't think it's the largest challenge in the world in terms of it. It's not insurmountable. I guess it's probably a better way to phrase it. So it certainly may challenge the economics for a while in the industry and certainly drive some costs up. But I think in the long run, if we all get to the point where we can feel comfortable that we're back to a normal level, it should be a short-term blip that we could survive.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I don't know, Michael, it dishes right over to you as a packaging supplier and a pretty high-tech packaging supplier. I think Larry just said, look, you could probably move some of this stuff in a dry van, 53-foot dry van, the right packaging.
Yeah, certainly we've looked at this as well too. What it really comes down to is the consumption rate and the distribution of these manufacturers. Is it one player distributing at one time, two or multiple? The volumes that are being released, let's face it, just like the airline industry, there's only so much capacity in the packaging industry, and the consumption rate of that, we really have to understand what that's going to be and really, have some conversations ahead of time. And like Mary said, the unknown is the biggest challenge for us, trying to be predictive, trying to use the data that's available, and make sure that we're at the right place at the right time, and balancing our network to whether it be ground or by air freight.
Good. Thanks. I'm gonna get maybe I get back to a couple questions I had prepared. We got a number of questions we've asked from the audience, and I'm going to keep reviewing those and asking. But we have shippers not only from healthcare and life science on the line, but we have other shippers, other manufacturers as well, who are thinking about the impacts that to their own supply chains. And I'm just going to ask you to kind of put on your hat and think about what other industries may be impacted. I think the last answer helped a lot, right? But what other industries might be impacted? What might shippers be thinking about going into 2021? And we'll maybe go with Larry. You want to start us off on that?
Sure, Jeff. So from a DHL perspective, we're trying to connect with all of our customers to really understand what their anticipated demand will be as we move forward, and being able to try to rationalize or equip our network. But we have added capacity to support what we believe will be a pretty strong peak. The one thing I would encourage the people listening and others to consider, though, is it's unlikely that the vaccine's going to arrive early enough to have a tremendous impact on peak. And what I mean there is, even with Pfizer and others now applying for emergency use authorization, that still means a limited deployment for the vaccine. So I think we're not going to see a large surge in vaccine volume until later in the first quarter or early in the second quarter of next year. And that's just a personal opinion, but certainly as I work with my team in the discussions we have ongoing with the manufacturers and others, that's where it seems to be leading to. So the good news, I think it will come after Chinese New Year, and we'll see this a subsidization or a reduction in the normal surge we see during the peak. So that's the first part. The second part is I think industries that potentially might be impacted are going to be the ones that have bought more air freight now to be able to support their demand. So certainly we've seen the high-tech industry, grabbing more capacity to be able to support that as people are slowly, develop work-from-home capabilities, and laptops and other devices are becoming more and more important. Even the deployment of 5G to be able to support that, so the infrastructure to move those capabilities. I also think e-commerce. Of course, we've seen. As a company that has an integrated business as well as a large freight forwarding business, we've seen huge surges in the e-commerce business out there and demand out there. So I think those would be areas where I could potentially see some challenges, if those surges continue at the levels they have been through the course of this year. But again, I do anticipate, as Mary, rightly pointed out, there are some aircraft that are sitting on the ground. I think if the demand is there and the need is there and the market levels rises to the point where the airlines can afford to put those aircraft back in service and be able to make money at it, I think we'll see some capacity return to the marketplace as well.
Yes,
Mary,
and
would
if I could just respond, I agree with everything that Larry said, and not because he paid me money to say that, but because there's another component of this, which is there's still medicines outside of COVID medicines which need to circulate around the world. So if you have somebody sick in your family with lung cancer, as an example, you know, that is potentially more important to them than a COVID vaccine. So we have to respect the flows that are still existing in the world today and find out a way to lock in and commit to our partners that those will continue to fly uninterrupted, and we won't just take them out of the equation as we look at capacity planning. The other part of this, I would say, is critical, and it's not just from the freight forwarder supporters of the airline, but it's also the manufacturers, is your ability to really look at your production schedules and lock into some type of commitment so that space can be reserved for you. And that space could be one position on an airplane, it could be a whole airplane. We've had numerous clients, pharmaceutical clients, that are not involved in the COVID-19 developments, but who are reaching out to secure charters of passenger aircrafts to ensure that their products continue to fly through Q1, Q2. They're already looking at Q3 at how do we buy a charter once a week to 5 different destinations to make sure our products continue to move. And to me, that is brilliant, because that's where everybody, whether it's a pharmaceutical or anything that has to go by air, you really have to, more than ever, be able to look at your production cycles and plan around everything that's going on so that you have space to get your product from point A to point B. Because even with airplanes sitting on the ground, which United, and I'm sure, I can't speak for every other airline, but I would only imagine that every other airline who has a wide body plane sitting on the ground would be looking for a way to get that into the air as part of this. You know, we're actively bringing airplanes back into service and getting them mechanically through their service checks so that we can put them back in the air as soon as there is the need by any COVID or non-COVID related customer out there, so that everything else keeps spinning in the world, not just COVID logistical requirements.
I'm going to go back to the audience because there are a number of questions that involve questions around security. And, you know, most of us know there are 2 different trade associations or industry associations that focus exclusively on freight security. And this is a huge issue within healthcare and other products, but in particular healthcare. Who would like to, you know, comment first? Maybe Laurent, on what are some of the areas of concern around security?
Right. Thanks, Jeff. I'm glad we touching on this point, and thanks for this pointed question to this subject. I think there are 2 schools of thoughts on particular for the COVID-19 vaccine. Depending on how the vaccine is going to be distributed in which form, that means that today, according to public information, the likely scenario is that the COVID-19 vaccine, as far as the US is concerned, the distribution will happen from a distribution point ready to be administered, which means that in the supply chain, when it moves in its raw form, the reusability of the vaccine itself, it's probably lesser of a concern. So freight security is very important. At the same time, when you handle and distribute vaccines that are already in solution, probably they have a higher value for the. That's a topic when the vaccine. I just got here a message. Can you all hear me? Okay. Okay. All right. Then
yes.
Thank you. So the other aspect is when it comes to security. I think in 2020 and this day of age, we do have good capabilities in the industry to deploy IoT devices to provide basically 24/7 geolocation information,
also including temperature information, shock, humidity. So all that is available. And I think considering this undertaking, that would be something to be added as a standard to the supply chain and in the distribution chain.
Yeah, and I want to dovetail for him for 1 second from Laurent here as well too. So technology for us and for packaging providers and such will be a big key role in ensuring the security of the distribution. So, technology moving to the forefront and with sensors of being able to be more exception management roles, providing limitations as far as temperature requirements, being able to alarm or alert and be more proactive in the security of the package while in supply chain, and being able to speak more to the stakeholders will be something that we'll see, I think, come to the forefront, and then something that's more usable and out there in the industry as we move past COVID into the future. So yeah, technology is going to play a big role in this, and I think will be an even bigger role as we move into the future.
Yeah, I've also heard through a couple stories that I've read that they're considering using air marshals or redeploying air marshals, maybe either in air or on ground, and some other. I think that's probably where law enforcement and the military most might be most involved. But if anyone has seen or heard or knows anything about that isn't giving up the store, want to weigh in on that.
I mean, Jeff, in the discussions I'm involved with some of the other governments outside the U.S., where my team's involved in those discussions, that's often a conversation. Will the police or the military in those countries potentially provide a security barrier or security layer that might exist? But I think generally for those of us that play in this space or are active in the movement of pharmaceuticals, we're keenly aware of the security needs around this. We've built processes and procedures, and many of us have our own private, workforces that specialize just in this kind of movement. So I don't think this is anything the industry hasn't seen before. The scale of it, again, may be a bit of a concern, but I think in general, as long as we do what we've normally done and just really build the right mousetrap, I think we should be able to secure this supply chain for this fairly well.
Great. We have 5 minutes to go. So I'm going to ask you each to summarize just from your individual perspective, from end to end, what is the one most difficult part of this solution to plan for, and how are you meeting that challenge? You've got 1 minute each. Larry.
For me, it's the final mile. How do we get that part right? I think it's easy enough, not easy, but I think it's a solvable problem to get it to country. But how do we ensure that we've built the right mousetrap to be able to ensure at the end of the day, the product gets into the hands or into the arms really of the people that need it? So that's the part I'm most concerned about at the moment.
Thanks. Michael.
Yeah, for us, it's the unknown, being able to be predictable, being able to have fleet utilization, understanding consumption rate by the manufacturers, the prioritization of the medicines that are out there and what medicines are flying, and making sure that we're not limiting capacity to other life-saving medicines that are out there. And we're still doing what we need to do to make sure that we're providing what we can to the industries to move what we need to move around the globe. And I think that comes back to being able to communicate with the manufacturers and being predictable on the distribution processes that we're going to see.
Mary?
For me, it is how quickly each company gets approval to distribute. I believe each company has an initial burst that will come out. It may not be a sustainable large burst, but I think there's going to be, once a Pfizer or a J&J or one of the many companies that's out there gets approved, you could see an initial pop. And if you have a second one and a third one right behind that first one, there's just going to be a real struggle to keep up with what everyone wants to try to do in the name of the right thing to do.
And Laurent, your thoughts?
For me, is the 3 C's: communication, communication, and communication. I think the only way, no matter in what industry you are, it will be very important to keep communicate with your partners, with your service providers. Provide as much transparency as you can share with your partners and providers. So there is a conversation, and we all understand really how we can fit into this challenge, because there will be challenges, there will be bottlenecks. I remember the 2010 Icelandic volcano outburst that shut down the European airspace for a number of weeks, and what kind of challenges that brought to the market, to capacity, to pricing, everything. And I think in order to be ready for that, which likely to happen and likely to reproduce in similar fashion, if we keep the communication, secure the partnerships, and keep talking, will be most important.
Great. Well, I just wanted to thank each one of you, and I'd like to address the participants here as well, our audience registrants. There are a number of questions that we were not yet able to get to. I think several of the questions overlapped. We will try to answer those questions to the extent that we can, and get back to you. This is going to be recorded, and I'm just going to thank you, Michael, Mary, Larry, and Laurent, for the preparation and the thought and the time that you've set aside to share your experience and in the thick of this, just at the precipice of the thick of it. And I want to turn this back over to Jennifer to close us out.
Sure. Thanks so much, Jeff. And thanks so much to all of you. I echo Jeff's thanks on behalf of NIT League. This has really been a fantastic conversation, and we certainly appreciate Mary, Laurent, Mike, Larry, for taking time out. We know it's hectic for you, and we really appreciate the time that you've given us this morning. And I again want to thank the sponsors of our session today, Strategic Wave Technology, Hirschbach Motor Lines, Pride Transport, and TTX. As we've heard today, teamwork makes all of this happen. So thank you very much. And to all of you who've attended, thank you for carving out an hour of your time today from wherever you are. And we hope you'll join us for another webinar that we'll have coming up soon, and we'll share those details with you. And just want to wish all of you a good Thanksgiving and holiday season, and ask that you continue to be safe and well, and we look forward to continuing being in touch with you. So thanks again to our panelists and all of you for attending today, and we will talk to you soon. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Jeff.